Okay, welcome back. The session this afternoon will start with another keynote, and then a recruiting session, and then another keynote. For the first keynote of the afternoon, my friend Alex Martelli, Senior Staff Engineer at Google and fellow founder of the Italian Python Association that has been organizing EuroPython, and definitely important person in the Python community.
Welcome, everybody. It's to help me do this talk in the most useful way. I would first like to start with a show of hands. What are your cultural assumptions? Who thinks everybody should always be striving for perfection of all times? So settling for any software release that's anywhere below perfect is a most regrettable compromise. Who feels that way? Any hands? I see one. Thank you so much. 2, 3. Okay. The alternative being, would you rather keep it simple, just good enough, lunch early, lunch often, get plenty feedback, listen to it, and iteratively improve, enhance, and refactor? Can I get a show of hands? Perfect. So I'm preaching.
No, not perfect.
Okay. Good enough. Not perfect, but good enough. So I'm preaching to the choir a very relaxing situation. Great. But that won't stop me from blabbering on for an hour about it. Anybody who knows me will know that. Where does all of this, well, let's start from a reasonably recent concept, the worse is better concept expressed by Richard Gabriel in 1989. He was actually having a serious talk about the future of Lisp, the prospects for Lisp at a Lisp conference. As an aside, kind of a humor break out of a very serious discussion, introduced the contrast between the New Jersey approach, also known as worse is better, versus the MIT Stanford approach, also known as the right thing. No bias there. He was just like putting tags on them with no bias at all. That unchained years of debate between worse is better and the right thing. Helping fuel the debate was Richard Gabriel, speaking on both sides of the issue. When he needed to make a point just contrasting what this Richard Gabriel guy had to say, he signed it Nicky Ben Bourbaki. I hope you recognize the quote to the refoundation of Nicolas Bourbaki and the refoundation of modern mathematics. The best arguments on both sides of the issue, whether in his own name or under the assumed name of Nicky Ben Bourbaki, were made by Richard Gabriel. He really helped, actually, by identifying the 4 core values that are identical in each approach. The worse is better, which is called the New Jersey approach because Unix was a great example, and Unix was developed in New Jersey, was you focus on simplicity, correctness, consistency, and completeness. It's kind of hard to argue against any of these values, right? No. I want complication, wrongfulness, inconsistency, and incompleteness. It's like good luck making a case for those. But the point is that with the same 4 core values, the way you weigh them and when there's a contrast, which one you favor, really matters a lot. And that's Richard Gabriel's deep insight, which is actually worth thinking about 24 years later. Simplicity is crucial to Unix. What's simplicity? It's especially simplicity of implementation, also of interface. But having something that can be implemented in a simple way is crucial. It is actually the most important consideration when you're designing. Can I think of a simple implementation of this design concept? Correctness matters, but if you have to choose, either be simple or be correct, it's slightly better to be simple. Consistency, don't be overly inconsistent, is how Gabriel interpreted that. And you know what? Don't know if any of you ever used Unix v7, but that's what he was talking about, 89, remember? It's pretty fair. Completeness can be sacrificed to any of the other. If there's any threat to simplicity, if to make your system more complete, you're sacrificing consistency, correctness, or worst of all, simplicity, drop it. You don't have to be complete. There are other systems. Just do one thing really well. And well mostly means simple. What's a counterpart? The MIT. Simplicity focus is on interface. No matter how many dark, incredible complications are hidden, as long as you do a simple interface, you're fine. Correctness is the absolute must, top priority. You need a mathematical model and you need to adhere to it. Consistency is just as important. There's no way you can do a mathematical model that's correct but inconsistent. Makes no sense. And completeness is roughly of the same importance of simplicity of interface. So, could we have a show of hand? Do you want to do the right thing? Anybody wants to do the right thing? Okay, one. Thank you very much, sir. A few. Anybody wants to do worse is better? Yep, I'm still preaching to the choir. Be careful what you wish for. You might get your wish. We'll get to that. Let's quote Richard Gabriel himself. From his very first talk on the subject, he was trying to be funny, but he couldn't avoid being deep. I know people like that. I'm lucky. The right thing philosophy is based on letting the experts do their expert thing all the way to the end, before users get their hands on it. Actually, I think the implication is get their dirty little grubby hands on it. You want to do perfection? Users live in the real world. The real world is not perfect. If you let users have any say, you will not be perfect. Worse is better takes advantage of the natural advantages of incremental development. In 89 is not really, although it may seem, I see a lot of young faces in the audience, it may seem like, okay, was I born yet? Yes, probably in kindergarten. It wasn't really that far ago. Incremental development was hardly a new concept. The point is that by doing the worse is better approach, you're naturally taking advantage of incremental development. Incremental development satisfies some human need. And that's, again, me quoting Richard Gabriel literally. Would you rather have ivory tower perfection or satisfy human needs? Well, to quote one of the great humanists of the 20th century, E.K. Chesterton, you may be familiar or not be familiar with the Father Brown series, and anything worth doing is worth doing badly. Because by doing it badly, as Chesterton put it, very plain-spoken guy, you get it in the real world way earlier. Now, years pass, and my friend Eric Raymond has a completely different take on it, which to me meshes like a glove. In 1997, he published The Cathedral and the Bazaar, and he's not so much focusing on design approaches. He's focusing on two different models of software development. The Cathedral, if you read it or reread it, which I highly recommend, right after following all of the Richard Gabriel polemic, it looks awfully close to the right thing. Experts are in charge. That's the core of the Cathedral. It's all about experts doing their expert things. The Bazaar, crowd-sourced, is chaotic. It's obviously a launch and iterate. It's very New Jersey-like. The crowd is in charge, and the crowd includes, inevitably, a lot of people who are helping out or maybe damaging, but whatever, this project because they need that software to do their non-software related jobs. And the core Bazaar idea, which really adds something to what Gabriel was talking about, is given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. So as opposed to thinking about the huge architecture and feature set, Eric focuses on bugs. Bugs disappear off a crowdsourced Bazaar system much faster because a million eyes are there, and given enough eyes, the bugs is obvious. Given the 10 experts who've developed the software, bugs might actually be pretty difficult to understand. Now, you may say, oh, bugs, it's about bugs. I don't do bugs. The software I write never has any bugs. Well, I could say that never happens, but I have a counterexample. 1974, three Italian freshmen, hardware design majors, and we got our one and only chance at actually writing a program. Fortran, old style, Fortran 4. Card punch, you got one chance to punch your cards, and then one chance to run the deck through the supercomputer, and that was it. If it ran, it ran. If it had any problem, you didn't get a second chance because, hey, we were undergrads. I mean, they were undergrads. Okay, fine, I was one of the three. We slaved over those coding forms, forbade the use of pens, only pencils so we could erase and rewrite. And the punching had you know about pair programming? That was pair punching. There was one guy in charge of punching and actually two other guys saying, nope, don't touch that. That'd be a typo. And it ran perfectly the first time. It was computing the conditional probabilities of suit division in the game of contract bridge. That's how we happened to know each other from before university. We were all youthful bridge fanatics. Okay, that was my turn. That was my one chance to write a bugless program. Never happened again. But hey, next year is the 40th anniversary, so maybe I get another chance. You know, maybe you get one every 40 years. I'll be very careful what programs actually write next year, just in case it works that way. If you can count on one bugless program every 40 years, I have a vast statistical sample of one, so it's probably worth more study, but don't count on it as your mode for development. What's my single biggest beef against perfection? Or aiming for perfection is the only acceptable outcome? Anybody can decipher that acronym? Anybody want to try? Great. Got it first time, sir. Perfect. Oops. Good enough. Yes, perfection, aiming for perfection from the word go, inevitably implies big design up front. If you never want to release anything but perfect software, well, the whole design must have been completed before you write a single line of code. Everything must proceed top down. Perfect identification of requirements. What exactly is the software going to do? Begets perfect architecture. How are they components? How do they interrelate? Begets perfect design, which begets perfect implementation. It takes forever and ever. Amen. And that's where wanting to use the perfect right thing kind of hurts you. It does take forever. You never get a release for years and years and years because it's not quite perfect yet. There's a comma in the documentation. We're still debating, should probably be a semicolon. That's what I think, but the committee has not decided yet. So we're not releasing any documentation, meaning we're not releasing any code, meaning real life does not cooperate. Stakeholders, the people who may or may not be paying for the whole effort, but really want to use or maybe sell, maybe they're salespeople, they need the software to be there in some imperfect but usable form. They resent the forever part. And that, the forever and ever amen, is part of big design up front. So, requirements are changing all the time. If your work has any impact on the real world is changing all the time. Everything is flowing. Fire, as Heraclitus said, is the primal element. So therefore, you can't nail requirements perfectly. Hypothetically, you could do a perfect job of identifying what the requirements were on February 20, 2013. But that doesn't help because you're not releasing that day. The day you release, maybe July 1st, 2013, the world has changed. The requirements have changed. Your perfection is a memory of the past. Then the architecture varies with your design choices, and the design varies with the implementation technologies. And implementation always has bugs, unless you're an undergrad in 1974 doing your first ever program as a hardware major. Only deploying in the real world actually makes you discover bugs. Therefore, big design up front is a losing proposition. An interactive development is the only way to go. Deploy something, not some junk, something that makes some people's life better, something that saves some real-world problems. Find bugs, fix bugs, improve, solve some problems, gain incrementally mind share. It's really the only way to go. Think of perfect. In Italian, they're pronounced the same, but in English, think of perfect, the verb, not perfect, the adjective. Perfecting your work is great, is what it's all about. Keep doing it. Have something out there, get real data, get real feedback from real users, and make it better. Perfect it, move towards a faraway objective. Perfection is a process, not a state. You can never reach perfection. Goalposts keep shifting. The real world, some of whose problems you're solving, keeps changing. There are never any laurels rest on. So it's not the problem of resting on your laurels, it's that deluding yourself that you have laurels so you can rest. It never works out that way. Now, does that mean everything is audible? No, not really. There are a few features, a few aspects, very general term, you never, ever want to skimp on. You need to have some lightweight, agile process, which has some components. I'm not going to dictate which lightweight methodology, which agile methodology. There's a lot, and they all have pluses and minuses. A lot depends on your team, on your application area, but every single one of them will have a revision control system. That's not negotiable. Which one? I don't care. Git, Subversion, Mercurial. I'm a Mercurial fan myself, but if you're really keen on Git or Subversion, they're good enough. Code reviews. Never skimp on code reviews. Every bit of code that actually hits the code base need to have two independent pair of eyes. The original author and somebody reviewing it at a minimum. Testing. If you ever skimp on testing, you're doing it wrong. Seriously, I mean it. If you ever find yourself saying, oh, should I test this? The answer is yes. I don't care. I don't need to know anything about the software, but yes, you should test it. Release engineering practice, I'm sorry, that's a whole other talk. But whenever a bug is, to summarize, like far too short, but whenever somebody points out a bug or a slowdown or a problem, you need to be able to understand exactly what bits they were running, which means you need to have release engineering, which is mostly about being able to trace exactly what was released as what version. It's very easy for software developers to, oh, I have a fix, I'll just like put it in, I got it code reviewed, and it's in there, it will just go there. And now you get somebody saying, it like uppercases all my text. And if you don't know exactly what bits have that problem, you're in trouble. So release engineering needs to be tracked. Some things I'd much rather never skip on because it's a fake saving. It's code style, clarity, and elegance. Not ever, especially if you're programming in Python, never really any good reason to be goofy and overblown. And documentation. If you're not documenting what you're releasing, you're essentially asking your users to reverse engineer the code. Oh, but it's open source, so of course they can read all the... That's a very lame excuse, I'm sorry. Don't use it. It just won't wash. Document what is going on. So, no cowboy coding. There is no condition under which cowboy coding is acceptable. There's a few things that must be in from the start, even though you're not aiming for immediate perfection, but only perfection as a distant goal. Security, including privacy, auditability, need to be in from the start. It is not repeatably feasible to plonk in privacy, security, auditability on code that was designed in obliviousness of these requirements. It just don't work. Remember, when you're thinking security and things, you're thinking of an adversary who would like to get at the credit card code that you're storing or private information, is probably smarter than you, or at least assume that. Very focused. You're focused on covering a lot of things. He or she's focused on just breaking your privacy. If you have security as an afterthought, you will not have security, I assure you. Now, there are things you'd like to have in from the start, but you don't absolutely have to, because it is possible to refactor later, especially if you can use some exculpatory tag like beta, meaning you're allowed a little bit of backwards incompatibility, modularity, the ability to take plugins, a nice, elegant API. I'm one of the greatest fans of APIs, but if you don't have it at first, you're not dead in the water. That's one of the things you can add later, because even though it feels like that sometimes, you don't have an adversary. The guys who are trying to program to your API are not actually your enemies. It may feel that way, but they're actually good guys. They're trying to make your software more useful. It's very different from the security area, where the guys on the other side are, or very likely to be, your adversaries. These are things you can retrofit. It is part of the universe of technical debt. Technical debt is normally euphemism for, I haven't written the tests yet, but eventually will. I think actually tests, it's much easier to have the tests in from this, at least unit tests, maybe not big scale integration and load tests, but the unit tests, come on. It's really easier. But there are aspects of technical debt like this code is not scalable. I know how I could do it because there is this algorithm that is n log n, but it takes me an hour to program. I can, in 5 minutes, do the n squared one. Let me release a pre-beta with the n squared and then get busy refactoring. That works. About bugs, the big thing you have to focus on, is it recoverable? Can a potential error that might be in your software cause irrecoverable losses? As long as it causes problems, can recover from, it's okay. It's, especially if you carefully tag it as beta. So I'm trying to be as general as possible. If your bug could kill somebody, then maybe this whole talk is not really, if you're doing like medical device control software, well, then a bug could easily cause irrecoverable losses. But most of the software we write isn't really that life critical. So therefore, what you're normally thinking of is, okay, so if I have a bug here, the Twitter sphere will trash me and my reputation will be in tatters. I've got reputational damage. Can I ever recover from having released software that, when used in Romanian, breaks because it mistakes some character set? It depends. More often than not, you can recover from reputational damage. Find me a single big successful company that hasn't at one point in their lives released something that really sucked. It wasn't pleasant. I'm sure some people lost their jobs, but the company survived. Especially if you have the right attitude, as in the guy who points out some bug is not my enemy, is actually my best friend. And therefore, I'm going, even though I'm not being paid for it, I'm nevertheless going to bend over backward to give courteous, speedy response to a guy or gal who's been nice enough to let me know that I have this big problem. Service. That's like, is obvious to the point it should be ridiculous if you're getting paid by these guys, but it also applies if they're not paying you. They're paying you with their time and attention in trying out your software, finding it has this bug, and instead of saying, "Yak, I don't want to have anything to do with this again," like taking the trouble to report the error. Pay them back. Give them good service. Speedy and courteous. That is more important than trying to be perfect out of the box, which ain't going to make it. Get it right the second time. It's usually okay, unless you're killing something. That's somebody. That wouldn't be. There's a little secret in customer service. It's controversial, but by introspection, I'm actually pretty convinced about it. The customers with the highest levels of satisfaction are not those who never had a problem. They are those who had a problem and it was resolved promptly and courteously. It's known as the service recovery paradox. It's controversial enough that I do not recommend you put problems deliberately in your software so you can fix them for the users. But the point is, at least don't obsess about the possibility of having a bug leading to recoverable damage. Just be on the watch out for fixing it speedily and courteously and with thanks to the customer who found the problem. This is actually, I think, yes, it's controversial enough that I'm not going to inject bugs just to make sure I can fix them, but it really took a lot of the load off my mind. Like all of you, I would raise my hand at the beginning, but like most of you, I'm really a secret perfectionist. Hello, my name is Alex Martelli and I'm a perfectionist. It's like, confess to it. It's the first. We know it's wrong, but we really want to shine in this light of perfection. So if there's something to fix and you bend over backward and give good service and fix it, it will be okay. It will probably be even better than if you waited another 6 months to release. Another potentially false trade-off, which I find myself asked about when I give this kind of talk. So, if good enough is good enough, I should just do a bunch of ad hoc solutions, right? Not worth my time to think of a general solution and put it in place. It's a false. The intuition may tell you, well, ad hoc, like point solution is going to be simpler than a general one. Not necessarily. Core principle, don't repeat yourself. If you think at the proper level of abstraction, or some say you squint just right, and you see the two ad hoc solution are like kind of duplicate of each other. Like this is a completely abstract example. This is find by color versus find by shape, and they're identical except what attribute is being checked. It's actually better to go for the general solution, which just gets an arbitrarily named attribute and checks it. And that's because if you have two, soon enough you're likely to have three, and you don't want to keep copying and pasting, and then one time you want to change something and need to find all the clones and like fix them all. Just have one. And if you want to keep the names like find by call, find by SHA, they're obviously trivially implemented with calls to this one. So let me give a few more examples of worse is better versus the right thing. starting, given the theme of this conference, with an example of programming. For example, we've given up this crucial advantage. Think about it. Shouldn't you switch to C++ right now and like get that slack from your boss? Well, if you're working, depending on the kind of boss you're working, but this doesn't really work in Python. So we've already renounced the perfect solution of getting half an hour off because, hey, it's compiling. So, well, nevertheless, take, for example, two different ways to conceptualize and implement, but this is mostly a conceptual model problem, networking. They're really very similar compared with ancient ideas about networking because they're hierarchical stacks. And this one is kind of, sort of, it's hard to defend on conceptual principles. While this one has taken 12 years to a committee of hundreds of people to design properly, and it's much easier. That's why for many years this was absolutely dominant in academia, because you can teach it as a principled solution. Unfortunately, guess which one rules the real world? The one based on rough consensus and running code. Does that vaguely remind you of worse is better or good enough? The author of this famous quote, David Clark, was actually at MIT. So that kind of breaks Gabriel's distinction between Stanford and MIT on one side and the New Jersey trash on the other. Point is that once he started working not on operating systems but on networking stacks, Clark, and far from the only one, it was just the one who happened to coin this great meme, became a pragmatist. He was the heart and soul of the Internet Engineering Task Force, ETF. And the point is that a great conceptual philosophical essay about why network and transport layers absolutely must be separated, compared with the confusion between them in the TCP/IP stack, which is, however, accompanied by code that just runs. Who wins? Who is going to conquer the world? Reality has given an answer. Let's make an even more extreme example. Anybody ever heard of Project Xanadu? Oh, quite a few. Good. Project Xanadu was the first, after Vannevar's Bush, as we may think, which was great, visionary, but like at least 20 years before any of that stuff could be done. Ted Nelson really conceived of hypertext, and he conceived of it the right way. For example, it's ridiculous that hypertext pointers should be one way. If you can get from here to what I'm pointing, it should be just as easy to get to who's pointing to me. Designing an architecture which basically requires you to make a snapshot of the whole wide web in order to be able to go back on pointers is obviously not perfect. Still, this perfect, ideal hypertext never actually could be implemented to like any kind of release, while this physical chemist who just wanted to make a decent way to share scientific papers just made up this hack, and it was good enough, and he released it. And there we have the World Wide Web. Guess which one conquered the world? The perfect thing that never actually got implemented, or the hackish good enough thing which actually hit people's life. One example, again from Gabriel, although he didn't know enough of the internal of the ITS, the Incompatible Time-Sharing System at MIT AI Labs, he was learning it soon after his talk. Think about a long-running system call, which, given it may be running for many milliseconds, it must be interruptible because things may happen requiring immediate attention. How does the system deal with that? Well, the right thing is obviously every system call must be able to unwind whatever state changes it's done, save everything, resume user mode, let the urgent interruption be handled, restart kernel mode, restore the store. Only problem, it's not exactly trivial. It's actually huge work. An alternative. Say the user code which invokes the system call which just happens to be interrupted gets an error. Which error? You've been interrupted. That's it. That's completely misdesigned. I mean, think about it. The application had nothing to do with interruption. It shouldn't have to worry about it, even though it's pretty trivial for the application to just retry the interrupted system call until it doesn't get interrupted anymore. Well, that's how Unix did it. It saved thousands of lines of assembly code all over the system drivers and in the kernel and conquered the world. Worse is better. Python example, mandatory one, or they wouldn't have let me into this room, I think. This is the right way. Metaclasses. They actually have some use, but all I want to do is make sure that every class of this kind has a foo component which is worth bar. So I subclass type, override new, delegate to type, do the setting, return the class, and then class X. This is a typical use of metaclasses. Believe me, I love metaclasses, but when class decorators were introduced, actually they came after, so this is not your typical example whereby somebody's like sitting off in a corner doing the expert thing and never getting done. But still, this is much more general. It can do a million things. Most of them you don't care about usually. This can only do very simple things, which are just happen to be what you normally want to do. So this is worse is better. I like worse is better. This is the right thing. Don't like it so much. So, is this all about programming? Never. Sorry. I'm very sorry to have to censor XKCD. But we do have some constraints about using certain words which XKCD doesn't suffer under. And obviously, we cannot be as audacious as XKCD is, right? We're considerate. XKCD is in your face. Never. Not us. So, just my opinion about the Boy Scout ethos of the whole thingy. Sorry. So, rappel down the building and bleep those people, want to have an adventure, do something, anything besides programming. So let's start with a article provocatively entitled "Good Enough Never Is." Eric Ries, right? It's essentially a promo for his book, but it's a good book. Lean Startups. Don't know if you care about founding a startup or if you need to be lean if you do, but it's still worth reading. He explains the good enough controversy from the point of view of, okay, I'm a startup. I don't desperately need revenue right now, but I desperately need feedback on whether what I'm working on is actually going to work in the real world. So he defines the minimum viable product, what I can release right now, and I should release right now. Collect the maximum amount of validated learning, that is feedback, with the least effort. Kind of a selfish approach, if you will. But the point is that in the end, whether you look at it the way I do, that is, solve some problems for real users in the real world, or as Ries does, learn something about real users in the real world, they're going to be the same. If you're not solving any real problem, nobody's going to use it. Nobody's going to give you feedback. So in the end, by the way, hands-on, 37 Signals, if you're familiar with that, degrees. Oh, come on. Just build something awesome and ship it. That's also an approach. If you've got Hanson on your team, I would recommend listening to him. Most of us aren't lucky enough. Something completely different. How to pick, do you want to pick a perfect employee? Anybody who's ever been hiring, do you want to pick a perfect employee? Show of hands. Not many. Does anybody want to pick imperfect employees? Well, I don't see much hands for this one either, but what's the problem? Okay, this is from the Undercover Recruiter, another great blog to follow if you're at all interested in hiring or being hired. And he makes the point, don't. Looking for the perfect employee, you'll delay by months and miss opportunities because, presumably, the reason you want to hire somebody is that you could be producing more, making more revenue, whatever, but no, that person isn't quite perfect, so I'll spend another 6 months not making that revenue because I'm looking for perfection. Have you ever considered the possibility that person might not be out there looking, might not be interviewing with you? So maybe he or she is somehow, somewhere, but if he's or she's so brilliant, they've already got a job they're very happy with, and they're not looking. It's, consider the way I think Charlie Munger, the vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, put it about marriages. You've got to pick the best one who will have you. That's not necessarily the perfect spouse. It's best within the category of guys who will make do with you. Plus, they may be making so much money you can't afford them. What about find a good fit? The guy there is not arguing for hire an asshole or somebody who doesn't understand how to compute 2 + 2. A good fit with a strong focus on personality and culture match. But he doesn't know Python. Big deal. In 2 months, he or she will be a great Pythonista. C++, 2 years. Okay, fine. But whatever. He or she will not know the exact set of technologies you'd like them to know. But if they're the right person, provide training. Focus on people who are eager to learn and a great personality and culture match. And get them in. You'll be happier. Okay, moving on to merchandising, consumer sales. This is a great book. I've never had to work in merchandising in my life. I still think of the hours spent reading The Paradox of Choice as a great insight into human psychology. Why more is less? Why offering too much choice damages your merchandising. Some consumers are maximizers. Their focus is getting 99.99% of what I want is not 100. So I'm a failure. I only got 99.99. And then there's a satisfier. 90% is great. I'm happy with that. 80% might be okay. Pareto would agree. You know, you get 80% there with 20% of the effort. Pareto's law. Pareto being a great Italian economist of 100+ years ago. It applies to merchandising. I'm pretty sure it also applies to other fields of life. Let's move on to war and politics. Ever heard about the Gettysburg Dedication? This guy gave, they much applauded at the time, Gettysburg Dedication. The occasion was just about exactly 150 years ago on what had been the battlefield of Gettysburg in the United States. The dedication of some part of the area as a cemetery for the soldiers fallen there at this huge battle, which was a turning point of the Civil War. This guy was the featured speaker. Edward Everett, major figure in the mid-1800s in America. He had served in the House, in the Senate, governor of Massachusetts. He had the reputation of being one of the greatest speakers of the era. He spoke 13,508 words in 2 hours. The reams of papers, worked over ceaselessly for months. Have any of you ever heard of this? No? Okay. Then, to conclude the occasion, the president rose, we have reliable testimony, he put a crumpled envelope back in his pocket and read, or recited by heart actually, 267 words in 2 minutes. This is the Gettysburg Address. Some of you, if you studied American history, probably know. Even though it was not correct, because he said, the world with little note nor long remember what we say here. And 150 years later, at least anybody who has got any interest in American history knows those 267 words by heart. So, this crumpled back of envelope was good enough. This is something I absolutely need to watch myself, because conciseness is hardly my greatest strength. But this guy must have worked months and months to prepare that address. He wanted to make it perfect. He may have, by the rhetorical standards of the time. Lincoln was quite a busy man, you know, president is like a busy job. So he just made it good enough. And we still remember it. So, am I trying to, lead to lowering expectations? Is that what I'm, spending these hours of yours? Absolutely not. When I say good enough is good enough, I do not mean that your dreams, your goals, ground level. Big, hairy, audacious goals is what we want in this life. Now, the words, rightly traced and well ordered, what of that? Speak as they please. What does the mountain care? Anybody recognize? So, my point is the best way towards those huge dreams, those moonshots, those big, hairy, audacious goals is release early, release often. Learn from real users' interaction, which you cannot do if you're keeping your masterpiece inside your ivory tower, waiting for it to grow to perfection and never releasing it. But a man's reach should exceed his grasp, or what's a heaven for? I imagine by this time, some of you with a bare inkling of English literature has recognized Browning's Andrea del Sarto, and maybe remembers the single best known and least remembered verse of English poetry. One verse of Andrea del Sarto are words you've always heard that were put in writing for the first time. Less is more. That's Browning interpreting del Sarto's poetry. Never heard of Andrea del Sarto? May I recommend a little visit to the Uffizi, where there's few of his. I don't think you really need to spend much time on his minor works, but go stare at the Madonna delle Arpie. It's really, really worth your time. And that's it. Thank you so much. I think we have 3 minutes. 3 minutes, right, for Q&A?
Thank you very much, Alex. Do you think that maybe the drive to perfection is ingrained in our culture from times when releasing was quite expensive? Like the marble statue of David, he could not get 3 improved versions out. He had no 3D printer or Gutenberg Bible like a weblog. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you, Armin. Great question. But the point is, Andrea del Sarto had a similarly high barrier to releasing. You know, once the picture was out there, any defect would stay forever. And some critics would say it wasn't rightly traced and well ordered. He still managed to jump that barrier 500 years ago. It's like nobody cares about whether my lines are perfect. Am I moving something in people's hearts? Now, I'm not saying software will, but let's translate it. Am I solving some problems in people's life in the real world? Maybe their job, maybe their entertainment. I don't really discriminate. But yes, you're right. It's like, oh my God, I'm chiseling in stone. If I make a typo, I need to get a new, brand new marble thing and rechisel from the start. It's probably wasn't true even in the time of the paintbrush. It definitely is not today.
There's actually a funny problem about a famous mathematical problem regarding how to choose the best employee, the perfect employee. It's called the secretary problem.
Yep.
And the actual solution for it is to just spend a third of your time looking for random people, and then the first one that is better than everybody that you've seen so far is the one that you should hire. And
right.
The most of the time you end up with the perfect guy.
So as potential employee, be sure to interview after the first third.
So where do you see
Stronger.
So where do you see tech as one of these two camps? Because you have where do you see tech, Don Knuth's tech program, which has the absolute final version will be version Pi. When version 3 came out, it was no more major changes. Then 3.1, 3.14, 1.1415, and up to 6. So there's a recognition that will never be perfect, but it's always coming towards perfection. And then there's the additional thing on top of that that says, when Knuth dies, it will be Pi. It'll be with an epsilon of Pi, and that's close enough to say it is done. Because the goal of that program is to have, an unchanged system that will produce the same now and forever.
I'm sorry, but unless you keep your mic closer,
So
I'm missing half your words.
So the goal of tech is to have a program which produces the same output at that point from now and forever, which is a different sort of goal than the ones you've been talking about, but it's still a very good, useful thing that's effective. How many people here have used tech?
I love that example. Most of the programs we write, however, do not address eternal truths like this one, which is a great example, so thank you for offering it, Andrew. They mostly address real-world interests and real-world needs, and that shifts. Maybe tomorrow the Parliament will declare that pi actual value is 3.0. Now what? Now what does your program do that computes at 3.141? Becomes illegal.
This is actually it. We can't take any more questions because the hour ran out, and now there's the recruiting session here. So thank you, Alex.